So today I wanted to talk a little bit. I've been thinking all week about what we should focus on, and I think one of the things is that we really have this inner peace, and but it doesn't come so easy. So I wanted to talk a little bit about peace. But before I get started to talk about peace, let's talk a little bit about what makes us uneasy. What are the troubles? What are the hard things in life actually that cause us to be shaken in our peace? What gets you easily startled? What is it that startles you? And in Dutch we say, wat maakt je makkelijk aan het schrikken? Simple things maybe already. Jane, what do you think? What startles you easily?
I know I'm easily startled, but I can't think of anything. Honestly, sometimes I heard a noise actually this morning when I was waking up. And instead of just thinking, oh, that's just a strange noise, I was immediately thinking, why is someone buzzing? Is that our door? I just get a little more anxious. And I think I just am a little bit on edge without realizing it. So I think I am living at a slightly higher level of anxiety than I thought I was. But besides the door, I can't think of anything right now that startles me.
Well, it's funny because people get startled all the time. You know you do. Somebody's just shouting boo. You know, it's already a startling thing. Somebody coming around the corner all of a sudden. Or maybe the ghost house on the fair. You know, you go into a carnival or a fair and you go in the ghost house to be startled. You like this idea, but you're sort of ready for it. So that's...
Not me.
Not you. Okay, well... Or maybe a mouse in the house.
Oh, well, yes.
Would you be scared?
Yes.
Would you get startled if there was a mouse in the house?
I have, yes.
Or like Jane said, certain sounds. And it just illustrates that if we're really honest with ourselves, it's really not that like, okay, but I don't have a problem with that. That never happened to me. We all have moments where all of a sudden we get scared or startled or we schrikken van iets. So, but then if I thought about... taking that a level higher, there's things that really concern us, that really can worry us. And I thought about the idea of the peace in the world. If we look in the world, this is a turbulent time. It's hard to be peaceful. Mm-hmm. It's hard not to be in sort of a constant state of being startled. Yeah. People are afraid of getting sick. People are afraid of, maybe they won't be able to get home right now because of the virus. There's people stranded in countries where they're not sure, or they're sitting in hotels that are locked down and they can't leave. This is hard. This would cause you to fear and to not be at peace. Or people are worried about even toilet paper. I had a laugh about it this week because in the store across from our house, it wasn't the toilet paper so much that was out, but it was also the chips aisle. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. But people are worried that maybe they get bored. People are worried about dying in the end. And if I really think about it in the end, what we really all, if it really comes down to it, we have to be concerned about is the end of our lives. And it's hard to come to grips with that. It's really difficult to face that and to embrace it and to be good with that. Mm-hmm. But Jesus made a promise in John 14, verse 27. And he says, to his disciples, he says, and to us, peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. Amen. You know, personally, I knew, and if I looked around me when I was younger, before I was a disciple, before I really understood that God wanted a relationship with me, I knew I didn't have inner peace. Mm. I knew that the world wasn't giving me the peace that I maybe wanted. I was afraid. I was very fearful deep inside. I wouldn't tell people this. I act very brave. I was very tough. I could push off. I could direct. I could tell people all kinds of things. On the outside, it didn't maybe look like I was afraid, but if I was really honest with myself, then I was fairly significantly fearful. When I was getting on a plane when I was young, I was about 20 years old, I would get on a plane and I really thought I had to really think through all the way that I was hoping and somehow that God was there or something vague actually in my mind or what it was is I didn't want to die in a plane crash. Mm. I remember being afraid of flying. But I didn't want to tell anybody that. And I was very brave in doing a lot of flying already when I was 20 years old. I just wanted to get places. And I pushed my fear away because of my goals that I had in life. But deep inside, I had a fear of dying. When I was leaving one time for a trip to go to the United States, right before it, I witnessed a horrific car crash. And I started thinking, every time I saw this pile up and I've seen people physically dying in front of me that were bleeding to death or crushed in the cars. And every time I was driving after that, it flashed through my mind that maybe this could happen to me. Every time I had to really struggle with this mindset of not thinking about the idea that something could happen to me while I was driving. I was afraid. Major life changes. I was afraid because of major life changes. In the middle of major life changes where there's a lot of stress on you, at some point I started getting pains in my chest. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and I still remember where we were at that particular moment. And I said, man, I'm having some pains here. He said, well, what is it? I said, well, it's kind of on the surface here. He goes, I know what that is. He says, those are stress pains. And it sort of feels like a fake heart attack. And I said, wow, really? And he said, yeah, this happens a lot to people. They just don't talk about it. And they are afraid. I said, usually that means that you're deeply, deeply afraid of dying or passing away or something horrific is going to happen to you. And I started realizing I was actually really struggling during that time. I was afraid. I was really afraid that this was the end, that I couldn't do anymore what I wanted to do, what I could do. You know, Jesus is not talking about that the world can give us peace. And he's also not talking about the peace that is like a lack of sounds or a lack of scary things outside or a lack of wars or maybe a lack of problems in the world. He's not talking about that. He's not talking about a lack of financial and economic disasters. That's not the peace he's talking about. He's not even talking about the peace that you get when there would be no viruses. He's not talking about it because only the world could try to manage that problem. But what he's talking about, he says, I do not give to you as the world gives. I do not give to you as the world gives. The world gives us external peace or short-term peace at best. Yeah. But Jesus gives us internal peace, peace in our hearts. So my question for you today is think about the peace that you have in your heart at the moment. What type of peace is ruling your hearts today? What type of peace is ruling your heart? And secondly, how do you think we can find that true inner peace? Do you have a path to that? Do you know how to get there? And or maybe on the other side, do you recognize that you're either suppressing it or ignoring it or rationalizing it away? Because I don't know how it is with you, but usually when I get worried, I try to, and people around me do the same thing. They try to kind of say like, well, don't worry about it. Or put it aside, focus on something else. Or maybe rationalize it like, yeah, but if it, you know the numbers and this and that. But when we think about that, suppressing, ignoring it, or rationalizing it does not really make our inner struggle, our inner fear go away. If we're really honest with ourselves, we're still struggling. So what path do you have to get out of that? Well, I wanted to look at Jesus for a moment. I wanted to see what he did when he was struggling, when he was in fear, when he was in a moment when he could have let this fear actually overcome him, and what he did with it. And this is in Matthew 26, verse 36 through 41. And this goes into our communion time because when we think about what Jesus did, it also can help us to understand what we can do in response. So let's read. And by the way, this is at a time when Jesus was certain that he was going to die. He had 100% likelihood of death facing him. And I thought about this today, and I thought, I don't have a security that I'm going to die because of this virus. There's a likelihood, but I don't have a security that I do or that I don't. Jesus was also facing a very turbulent time like we do, and he actually chose. He knew and he chose that he wanted to die. This is sort of like, I thought about this today, It is sort of like us saying, like, if I go into this, if I jump in the middle of this virus situation, if my death would help everybody, I'm going to die for everybody else, which we can't do, and it's not going to happen. But Jesus did this. He basically said, look, I don't need to die. I don't have to die. I can escape this death. I can do all kinds of things about it. He could stop anything. And he said, no, I choose to actually go in and die because of helping us to be able to live with God forever. So in Matthew 26, verse 36, it says, then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane. And he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. So Jesus here is really struggling. He's feeling it. And then he said to them in verse 38, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. And this is so great because Jesus is in touch with himself. He's self-reflective. He's honest with what he's feeling. He's honest with what he's struggling with. And this is such a great lesson for us to start out with. To start out with is, can we be really honest? I thought about it this week and what I was struggling with, and when I was thinking the very first time that I really saw the significance of this problem. And I had to think about myself, can I just say what I struggle with? And there was a moment when I started realizing, people are panicking around me. What should I do? And for a moment, I did feel this panic reaction coming up in my heart. I was like, just taking my breath away. And I thought about my kids, and I thought about the end, and I thought about this could all be over. And it started to escalate really fast. And Jane and I were talking about this, and I talked to the children about it, and we sort of worked it through. And so here is the thing, is being honest is so good. It's so healthy. What I feel, what I struggle with. And of course, it doesn't help to push this on others to get everybody else scared. But it is very good to say, this is what I struggle with. This is what I'm trying to process. This is what I'm dealing with. What do you think, Jay?
Yeah, I think that I feel like I've learned in the last several months how to let you have your feelings and let me have mine separately. And that's handy in this situation, not because you have so many feelings about this, but that I see other people with a lot of feelings, and they come out sometimes in like intense texts. I'm getting people from London, everywhere. People I don't know very well are sending me warning texts, and I can see that I can listen, I can watch the videos, I can do all these things, but I can see that I don't have to take on their approach. I don't know necessarily if it's fear. Sometimes I see very clearly that it is, but it's a feeling that they have, and they feel a desire to protect me. So here's the latest stats, here's the latest thing, and wow, it can be overwhelming. But I'm learning to back off and say, okay, here's the facts, and here's God. And yesterday I had a great study with Helen and Elsa about this, just talking about looking at something and not having to enter into it, but being able to remove myself from it and to say, okay, what can I do with this? And I think that's what Jesus is talking about earlier when you said that he gives us his peace. It's not the same as the world's.
So it's important to be in touch and to communicate our feelings and to communicate what we struggle with. And it's actually more healthy to actually express it than to put it on people. Making them fearful for something we're fearful about. People, we're all not the same. Right. We're all different, and we all have different fears for different reasons. Yeah. And they may express themselves in different ways. We should really be considerate of that. Yeah. And Jesus was too, actually. He asked his disciples to pray with him. He didn't ask his disciples to be as worried as he was, or as struggling as he was, or he just shared his own feelings. And he allowed them to do what they needed to do, although he was really concerned for them as well. Yeah. So let's go back to verse 38 one more time. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Now he is asking them for help. He's asking them to watch with him, not to worry, not to panic, but to watch with him. And we do need each other's support. Amen.
Amen.
Then going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will. And this is the surrender moment, when he's basically saying, yes, I have a concern. I am worried. I am to the point of death even, deeply, deeply struggling. But I want to surrender. I want to surrender it to you, Father. Yet not as I will, but as you will. And that's the moment where we make this flip, where we really surrender it to God. Now, we obviously can't do this to our neighbors and our friends. They're not able, we cannot surrender to them. They cannot do much of anything for us when it comes to inner peace and the type of things that we struggle with. But God can. Then in verse 40 it says, then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour? He asked Peter. Now he's not saying, and I was struggling and I was really praying and you should have seen what I was dealing with. He's just asking them, could you please just have done this? And he was disappointed in them. But that's okay too. We can be disappointed in each other and express our disappointment and ask each other for more help. But he's not putting any pressure on them. He's just asking them, couldn't you? So he says, watch and pray in verse 41, so that you will not fall into a temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He wants for them what he wants for himself. He wants that they are strong like he was able to be strong. He wants them to surrender to God like he surrendered to God. So these were the 3 steps that Jesus took. Number 1, he prayed. Number 2, he decided. Number 3, he took action. And we're going to look at this for a moment. Because what he does, he goes on and he closes out in the rest of the scriptures, and it talks about how he says to his disciples in the end, he says, let's get up and let's face our accusers. Let's go out there and let's do what we need to do. And he takes action. He goes specifically towards the problem and he faces it with courage and full of faith. So here's the thing. Those are the 3 things that Jesus did. My own personal thought was well, and if I think about these 3 steps for myself, what am I doing? What did I do? Have I prayed? And this is true. There was a moment when it was really hitting me how serious the situation was. And I did go in prayer, and I went to God. And I asked myself, would I be ready to leave right now? Would I be ready to be taken up and to be with God in heaven for the rest of eternity? And I thought by myself, yeah, I would. And I prayed about it and I surrendered that and I said I would. But then came the decision point. But what do I want? Because Jesus wanted, he was also thinking about, what do I do? What are my resolutions? And so my decision was, yes, and I want to continue to do whatever it is I can do for other people while I'm still here. Just like Jesus resolved himself to go somewhere. Now that's a resolution on to do something. It doesn't mean you have done it yet. And Jesus had to come to this resolution. The last thing is the action plan. What is it that I actually did then? Because I made a resolution, I want to continue to do what I've resolved in my heart and my mind. When I became a disciple, I decided to want to live for others, to live for God and live for others. And I thought by myself, am I still there? Am I still willing to live for God and to live for other people, to be there for those who need me while I'm still granted this short time in this life? And then I made an action plan. I said, yes, I do. I really do. I want to be there for other people. This is why I'm still here on earth. And the action plan was calling people, FaceTime with my children, with others, Bible studies. And these are the things that I resolved to do. Let's initiate. Let's think of ways that we can connect with each other. Let's set up Bible studies. Let's set up prayer times. Let's set up groups. And so this is what we're in the process of doing. And I'm so proud of everybody in church that's doing the same thing with us. So before we take communion, let's pray and let's think about what Jesus did and how we can follow his example.